I'm hoping that this evening will be, perhaps even more than normal, humorous. Because, as a great poet once said, these days you have to laugh to keep from crying. And so I'm going to hopefully enable you to laugh. Although if you think about what I'm saying, you may very well start crying. Try to do that quietly so it doesn't interfere with everybody else. Okay, a few shorter things and then we'll go into the bigger ones. The Boeing 737. Here's an example of where laughter will help you to keep from crying. There have been two terrible crashes. The one very recently in Ethiopia. I'm sure most of you saw the pictures and all the sad. Everybody on it was killed when the plane crashed. This is a Boeing aircraft, 737 MAX 8 is the code number of this airplane. And pretty soon after this, since it's the second crash of this identical plane in the last year, virtually every other country on Earth grounded the plane, stopped letting them fly because there obviously is something wrong with these planes to have two deadly crashes in a relatively short amount of time. There were two exceptions of countries that chose not to ground the airplane. One was the great United States of America, and the second was, and there's no nice way to say this, the relatively servile country of Canada. Those two didn't do it, although today they did it. Several days late, so that the whole world can see the difference between what they all did and what this country did. Of course, it had no relationship to the fact that Boeing is an American company. That clearly is not a factor in any of this. That was an attempt at humor, what I just did, okay? Okay, good. I just want you to be with me as we do this. If you needed an example of the profit motive and that kind of thing outweighing concerns about safety, this is about as good as you're going to get. It ranks right up there with being more concerned about selling arms than about bone saw assassinations of journalists, which seems also to have been relatively unimportant. Many of tonight's short items are comments on the state of this society, and I would like to urge you to make it as explicit as I know how, to begin thinking about the society we live in as disintegrating, as falling apart. Something I have not thought most of my life, and only recently began, as it all kind of crowded in on me, to begin to think like that, which is itself interesting that I should think like that, having not done so for most of my life. So here's another example. And if you haven't caught this story, I really do urge you to take a look at it, but it's fairly new in the news, so maybe you have. The FBI and California and other police folks, over the last 24 hours, arrested, I think it's about 20 people or 30 people who were in, what? 50, my apologies, even more. Maybe there'll be more tomorrow, who knows? Who were involved, and the number is impressive, who were involved in an elaborate program operating for years that was a conspiracy. It involved bribery, it involved not paying taxes, an immense array of criminal charges that have been put against all of these people who have been arrested. Here's what the basic thing was, and that's important for you to understand. This was a program that charged an enormous amount of money to wealthy people who understood that Sweetie Pie, that's their children, hadn't paid a whole hell of a lot of attention during high school, which led them to be in the situation that getting into college would be a major challenge, which is a polite way of saying no way were they going to get in to school. For many of these young people, as I'll explain in a minute, they didn't want to. But their parents had other ideas. That happens sometimes. And the parents were determined to get Sweetie Pie into a properly reputable school. By the way, the schools include Yale, University of Southern California, UCLA, Georgetown, fancy, pretty well, you know, high up there in the rankings of American universities. And so they did a whole host of really creative things, mostly involving bribery of officials at the university, to change grades, to ignore grades, They also bribed people who are in charge of those SAT and other kinds of exams so that whatever Sweetie Pie's grade got magically grew over a weekend. They arranged for people other than Sweetie Pie to take the exam in Sweetie Pie's name. They even studied Sweetie Pie's handwriting so that the substitute could write roughly like he or she did. They got ingenious. I was interested in the Yale example because I went to school there and I have a deep affection for the institution. And the way it worked at Yale was they had a coach, I believe a soccer coach, if I recall the details. And what he did was to designate a particular person who was trying to get into Yale and, as I said, had no opportunity to do that, to make that person designated as a recruitment for the team. See, it turns out, this may come as a shock, it turns out that colleges use the application process to have a more successful team than if they just took students based on their capacity as students. I told you this might come as a shock, because it begins to erode your concept of meritocracy. The notion that you get where you get in American society because of the hard work you put in and the aptitudes you have and the capabilities you develop. I know many of you want to believe that, but it is right up there with believing that the color of Mr. Trump's skin is natural. And you know, you should outgrow that at a certain point if life is not overwhelming you. So here's what they did. This coach at Yale would be given money in exchange for designating such and so as a recruitment candidate for the soccer team. Then Sweetie Pie would get accepted at Yale because they want to have a good soccer team. You know why you want to have a good soccer team? Because it enhances your ability to learn? No. Because it pleases alumni who give money. Keep that in mind, the alumni who give money. So you're accepting students to get the money. The students who have a lot of money spend the money to get the position that will get them having the money that their parents already had to get them in there. This suggests a continuation of wealth, doesn't it? They fired him at Yale, assuring everybody, the president of Yale did yesterday, that he was the only person who ever did anything like. He was full of shock and dismay, Yale was. And if you believe that, then again we have reference to the natural color of the president, okay? The guy who perpetrated all of this, who has turned state's evidence, the FBI got to him, so he then ratted out all the people he'd worked this plan up with over the years. Another touching commentary on our society. He had set up a foundation. You know, if you set up a foundation that helps poor children get into college, then you don't have to pay taxes. So the wealthy people who have tons of money and wanted to spend it to get Sweetie Pie into college couldn't, of course, take it off on their taxes. There's no slot there on the tax form. Bribing is not, you can't deduct bribery. And putting it down would get you into potential trouble. So nobody paid for the service. They made contributions to the foundation to help the poor children, of which there were none, get into college. That way they could deduct what they were paying as a bribe as a contribution to a charitable. This is America. You live in this. Now, of course, this is illegal, a lot of this stuff, which is why they got arrested. But there are legal ways of doing this that happen more or less, I would say, on the average, every 5 minutes. People give money. Suddenly, the candidate looks a lot better to the university. You do know how Jared Kushner made it to Harvard. If you don't, look it up. Okay? I remember, since I also went to Harvard, unfortunately, my parents had no money, which I've held against them all my life. I remember noticing in the dormitory at Harvard when I went there that a good number of the young men in the dorm with me were very, very unhappy at Harvard. They really didn't want to be there. They couldn't do the work. They didn't like doing the work. They never had studied. They didn't understand the point of it all. They were coming from good families and knew that their father would get them a job when they were done. It wasn't really... What were they there for? They would have rather been doing anything. They were very, very unhappy, but their parents told them, you have to go. So there they were. And many of them couldn't do anything in the classroom. They were given what Harvard proudly in those days told everybody was called a gentleman's C. In other words, at Harvard, if you came to class and you were demonstrably not dead, you got a C. If you bestirred yourself to go to the library, just a bit, you got a B. And if you actually paid attention, you got an A. And very typically, those who came from public schools, which were a minority at Harvard, were the ones who got the A's because they were used to sweating it, because they came from families which saw this as a way out of where the family was. That was my family, and it would be a way out by sending their little sweetie pie to their school. And you couldn't do it with money since they didn't have any. Harvard has asked me every year since I graduated for money. I always write back on the form, you must be kidding. You should give me money. I never get a reply. Never. It's extraordinary. And it leads me to say, because I want to, this business about meritocracy, it dies very hard. I have tried in countless classes that I've taught all my life to explain to people that the notion that the way this country works is that it looks for the best qualified person to give an opening to, or a job to, or an opportunity to. That's not true. That has never been true. Meritocracy is a very bad joke, and you shouldn't be fooled. Meritocracy is an idea invented to handle a very practical problem, particularly in capitalism. Here's the problem. The number of jobs of any kind, particularly good ones, is limited. The number of young people who would like to get those jobs is much larger than the jobs that are available. Just like the number of people who want to go to Harvard is very large, and the number of people accepted each year is much smaller than that. Okay, you've then got a real problem in a society that doesn't provide important, interesting, and well-paid work to everybody who wants it, which would be the logical way to handle this. We can't do that. That conflicts with profit. So we limit it. But then we have a problem. We have to tell an awful lot of people, you're not getting that job. You're not going to that school. You're not getting that opportunity. And now we have a moment of great crisis, because it's possible that the people denied all those opportunities might understand that they're perfectly qualified to go there. And therefore they might become, get ready now, angry that they're being denied an opportunity that they're as good at, taken advantage of, as lots of other people, but they're being denied. The society couldn't survive that level of anger, since the majority are the people that are denied. There's thousands of people who want to go to Harvard. The class that comes in each year is maybe, 800 or 900. So you got a lot of people you're pissing off. It's very important that they don't think of it as the failure of the system. They don't think of it as the failure to provide an interesting job to people who only ask for the opportunity to work hard, but it's something that means something, both to them and to their community. You don't do that in capitalism. Biggest growing job right now is being a greeter at Walmart and other exciting work. So it's crucial to get people to think that if they don't get that opportunity, it's not the fault of the system, it's your own fault. It's you. You don't know enough. You didn't go to the right school. You didn't major in the right topic. You didn't work hard enough. You didn't get enough A's. You see, it's all your fault. So screw you. You're just getting what you deserve. The only thing you should be angry at is yourself. So now slink off, go to the bar like everybody else, and try to forget it. But don't get angry at the system. This notion that it's your fault, that's meritocracy. Telling you the idea that the people who got the opportunity merit it. They're smarter than you, they worked harder than you, they're better prepared than you. Stop. That's a way to get you to be docile, to be resigned to what is done to you, rather than to become a critic and an oppositional figure. Very effective, very effective. I can assure you, since we're talking about universities, since I did spend my entire educational life at Harvard, Stanford, and Yale, that's the only places I ever went, I was surrounded at all times by people who were not good at what they were doing, who didn't like doing that. They didn't want to. They were good at plenty of interesting things, but being a student wasn't one of them. They didn't want to be there. It was the family that said to them, you must. You will be a failure in the eyes of your mother, your father, and the people in our circle. You must. And you mustn't just go to anyone, you must go to one of those. That's why, if you're in trouble, if Sweetie Pie really has nothing to show, then you have to go to one of these services and buy it. And they're all ready to do that, and it goes on. I was surrounded by these people, loads of them, all the time. And they were used to it, because they had been sent to private schools as youngsters. They had been to private elementary, secondary. College was just the next rung. These were the people who endured the 4 years of college, got their bachelor's degree, and never went back to anything, didn't pick up a book, had no concept of any of these things. And I'm not saying that these were not smart people. They were. Interesting, capable in all kinds of areas. Some of them found their way to being good at a sport or at business or something that they actually were interested in. But being in the school, that was a purchased commodity, and it had nothing to do with merit. Don't do that to yourself. Blaming yourself is not healthy. Don't do it. And don't let the system fool you into accepting it. Next short item. A Chinese corporation has been in the news practically every day since our last get-together here 2 months ago. Huawei, or I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it properly, but I'm sure many of you have heard about this. This is a 5G technology communications company based in China, a Chinese company, and it has been having trouble. It is, by the way, the technological leader. It has the best quality, pretty much everybody agrees to that, the best quality of this kind of 5G, latest kind of communications equipment in the world. By the way, itself an interesting sign that the Chinese are now able to become number one in this, and that's not the only field where they are ahead in this way, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. But suddenly, they came on to, by the way, they've been around for many years. It's not a new company. Its technological specialties are not new. Its skill in this area is very well known. But suddenly they came on the radar. You may have heard about it if you paid some attention. A high executive, the daughter of the founder of the company, was traveling in Canada, was arrested at the Vancouver airport by the Canadians on a warrant from the United States, accusing her of violating the embargo in trading with Iran and several other things. And they've held her in a kind of semi-detention in Canada to this day, awaiting extradition. If that gets worked out, she will be sent to the United States for trial, presumably. Here, a very extraordinary thing to do, clearly designed as an attack, as a way to get at the corporation. That was followed then by a program that continues to this day, led by Trump, led by Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, and others, attacking this company on the grounds that it represents a security risk. In other words, if you buy and install Huawei equipment, they will have the ability, maybe, it's murky and no real evidence yet has been put forward, but the accusation is they are close to the government in China, and that the government in China either has already or could or might or would use its power over a China-based company to get their equipment to function as a kind of spying mechanism or eavesdropping or hacking or a variety of ways that electronics can be used. Okay, this is the charge and this is the accusation. A number of countries, Australia particularly, I don't remember them all, have now told Huawei they won't buy their material or they won't buy part of what their product line is in deference to this notion of the security risk that they represent. Other countries have been noteworthily unwilling to do that, including Great Britain, Italy, I mean, important countries in the world do not agree with the United States about this. But that's not what I want to stress for you. Here's what I want to stress. To be aware of the utter absurdity of this. Until a year or two ago, the world's technological communications equipment was overwhelmingly American. The United States government has very close relationships with Apple and Google and IBM and Cisco Systems and all the others that produce this stuff. If the rest of the world was worried about the security of their communications, it would have been the United States, whose virtual monopoly on that stuff would have exercised them for the last 25 years. And as if that weren't enough, I don't know how many of you remember, but early in Mr. Trump's presidency, he went to Germany, where he met with Angela Merkel. And they had a press conference. It got a lot of attention because Mr. Trump had the extraordinarily bad taste to make a joke as he's standing on the podium next to her about how the United States, under Obama, by the way, had eavesdropped on her and her telephone. Let's stop and review. The United States used its technological capabilities, well known. By the way, why do we know the United States is very good at spying on people? Because it spies on us. It's been caught doing that half a dozen times. So we know the government can do it. We know the government has done it to us. Sure as hell is going to be doing it to other people. And they got caught doing it to the leader of Germany, ostensibly an ally, whose phone was hacked by the United States. And our president made a funny joke about it. If you ever go see that clip, you'll see she didn't laugh, Mrs. Merkel. Not even a little. Not a little. So what is this? There might be a possibility that the Chinese, could you believe it? That the Chinese company might be doing what we have been doing for 20 years. What is this outrage from? It's as phony as a $4 bill. Don't be fooled by this nonsense. By the way, might the Huawei company do it? My presumption is they might very well. I presume these companies are doing that. I presume every country is trying to make sure that they don't get that real well. Interfere with it, block in it, give them false information. The usual things countries do. When one country gets a new technique, you discover how to block, thwart, undo it. But the notion that, oh my God, the Chinese might, what? You really have to get sucked into the crazy propaganda to take this stuff seriously. Yes, my guess is the Huawei does some of this. My guess is IBM does it, and Cisco does it, and Google does it, and Facebook does it. You get it, of course you do. And every country is trying to undo that, to block it, to confuse it, to mess it up. That's what you do. That's what these countries do and have been doing for centuries. As they develop techniques to spy on one another, they develop techniques to block it. That's not new, that's not surprising, and it has nothing particularly to do with China. Last step, because it's another issue here. The Chinese, claim made, steal our technology. Now, there's two things about this to keep in mind. One is really ugly, so I'll only mention it briefly. There's a certain racism here. There's a certain notion that we white people have a really good scientific, and if they seem to have some science, they must have stolen from us. So I won't go in there You can all let that float around in your head if you hadn't thought of it before, which you should have. But here's what the Chinese did 30 years ago. They made a decision, a strategic economic development decision. They were going to do what the Soviet Union couldn't and didn't do. They were going to hitch their star, their hope to go from being a poor, backward country to becoming an industrial powerhouse. They were going to do it by becoming an exporting company. They were going to do it by producing cheaply better quality than the West was producing for itself. And they knew they could not do that by themselves. They needed two things which they didn't have. One, the technology to produce efficiently, cheaply. And number two, entree, because it's one thing to produce the stuff, you have to distribute it. You have to get a way to get your better stuff, cheaper stuff, into the markets that the mass of people with money go to. And their decision, therefore, meant they had to cut a deal with the West. They had to cut a deal to acquire the technology and to acquire the distribution system. Here's how they did that. They invited companies in. British companies, German companies, Japanese companies, American companies, Canadian companies, and so forth. And they said to them, very explicit, we are going to provide you with cheaper labor than you ever dreamed you would have. Not just cheap, well-educated, disciplined, used to working, hard work. We'll take care of all of that. And number two, as we develop our economy, we will give you entree to sell your products here in China. You get the workers and you get the market. But the deal was, we get the technology. Nobody's stealing anything. No American company had to go there. No one had a gun to their head. You want the cheap labor? You want the market? No. Give me. That's what they did. Real good bargaining of the sort you learn in business school. No stealing. By the way, was there some stealing? Of course they're stealing all the time. One cookie company is stealing the recipe from another cookie company. They go to court. That's how we know they're stealing, because the courts are full of what is called industrial espionage. It goes on all the time. I'm sure the Chinese do their share. But the notion that this is some peculiar specialty of the Chinese, that's right up there with Huawei being possibly a security risk. It is, to use a technical term, crap. And you shouldn't be attracted to crap, and if you are, you need to work on that. Okay? By the way, historically, you should enjoy a little reminder. When Britain was the empire that ruled the world, the British businesses were constantly saying that everybody coming up to attack or to compete with the British had stolen their technology. You know who they accused that of? We, the United States, stole the technology. The Germans were accused, because they were big competitors, of stealing. Every country that is challenged by an upcoming new country competitively has told the same story. Don't be fooled. It's just a rerun of a very old movie that we're being treated to. They stole our technology. Come on. What are you going to do, hide your technology? If you didn't make a deal with them, they would buy one of these products and they'd figure it out themselves. They do that anyway. This is a game. Let me remind you of a sad case in American history. At the end of World War II, as you know, the United States was the only country on earth to drop nuclear bombs on other people. Two of them in Japan. You all know that? Some of you are looking at me, so I can tell you didn't know that. Well, you should. Okay? It then became very urgent for the other countries in the world, particularly those that saw the United States as an enemy, to catch up, because not only did the United States have a devastating weapon, but the United States had indicated it could and would use it. And if you ever seen what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the two cities in Japan where the bombs were dropped, that would be scaring to anybody. So the Russians, the Soviet Union, went to work intensely to get the bomb. Americans said, they're Russians. It'll take them decades. Nothing to worry about. 3 years later, they had it. Analysis in the United States was they stole it. Because you could, that Russians? Russians? They couldn't have done it by themselves, just like the Chinese couldn't have done it by themselves. They had to steal it. But it went to the point where 2 people were arrested, a husband and wife here in New York City. They were arrested, and they were charged with having leaked the secrets to the atomic bomb from the United States to the Russians. And they were executed here in the United States, those 2, that couple. Rosenbergs, I presume most of you know that. So this is heavy stuff. This blaming of people stealing our technology, that has a very dangerous track to which it goes. Okay, let me turn, because I want to leave enough time to do the China stuff properly. Let me turn now to the budget. I had been interested in talking to you about the budget deficits, but I got upstaged. I didn't know it was coming so soon. So a couple days ago, Mr. Trump very conveniently released his budget for fiscal year 2020, which is the year coming up. And so I want to talk to you about that budget, okay? There are a number of things very interesting that you have to understand. You're going to be reading and seeing a lot about it. It is the job of the president to prepare a budget and send it to Congress. However, it's the Congress that decides what's in the budget, not the president. His job is just to, here's an idea, or here's what I would like to see, but it will be up to the Congress. Now, when he did it the last couple of years, he was dealing with a Republican-controlled Congress, so what he wanted was kind of mostly what he got. Now, with the Democrats controlling the House of Representatives, that's not going to happen that way. There's going to be a lot more fighting about it. But nonetheless, it's the starting point for everybody, and it tells you a lot about where the mentality is, and I think there are interesting things you can pull out of it. Okay? All right, so let's start. The single biggest item, as is always the case with us, is the military. So let's talk a little bit about the military. This last year, the military got about $700 billion. $700 billion. Okay, that's a lot of money. And that's what goes to maintain the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and all of that. And the military wanted more this year. They wanted, in the neighborhood, I won't worry about the exact numbers, but roughly $730 million. They wanted it to go from 700 to 730. Okay. The Trump budget proposes 750. In other words, the Trump government is offering to give the military more than the military asked for, which the military assumed they wouldn't get all of. This is a way, this is very technical now, this is a way to keep the military happy. It's doing what they want. It's giving them more money than anybody else has, more money than they could possibly want. It is more money than they requested. And it is clearly a reward for the stunning victories they have achieved in Iraq and Afghanistan. You do know we are officially negotiating with the Taliban in Iraq. We've been there for whatever it is, 16 years. And in the 16 years of war, we are negotiating with the people we went to war again. And the negotiation is about when and how the United States leaves the country. Only in America can this be portrayed as a victory, but that's what's being done. Iraq, the government there is now closely working with the Iranians. I don't know if you're following this, but that too is a glorious bust. So we have a military with 2 extraordinarily long wars that they have basically lost. And so clearly they ought to be given more money. Now here's how this is going to play out. Mr. Trump is making sure, and please don't be so naive as to think there's anything mysterious going on here. He's taking care to make sure that the Army is not a problem for him. Mr. Trump, as you've probably noticed, has been stunningly successful in making an enormous number of enemies at home and abroad. I don't recall a president of the United States who is normally and regularly referred to in at least half the newspapers of this country as a perpetual liar. It's really quite extraordinary if you think about it. So he's got a problem. There's all kinds of people who don't like him, not even a little. And he's not doing much about that. It's not going real well for him. If the army were to make the decision that he's not good for the country, that could really tip the whole story. I know many of you think that this kind of thing only happens in other countries. It doesn't. They didn't think it would happen there either. He has to keep the army happy, and that's what he's doing. He's been doing that from the day he got in. You notice that he often nominates generals for various jobs? Hello. That he has nothing at all in the way of criticism? He will criticize his intelligence agencies, not the military. And when he steps out of line, the military lets him know, hello, Donald, that's not going to happen. Did you notice when he announced that the United States is going to withdraw from Syria? Basically, the military told him, no, we're not. 3 days later, he fumbled and bumbled, and now it's all on hold, and maybe it'll happen, and maybe not so much, and we'll leave some there. So he has to take care of the military, which he's doing. The Democrats, not to be outdone, are going to say, that's too much for the military. We have to have money for social programs. That's their tune. And they will fight and they will yell and they'll come to a compromise. And the compromise will be, I bet you, to give the military about $730 billion, which is kind of what they wanted. It will allow Mr. Trump to go to his base and say, I moved them up from 700 to 730 billion. And it will allow Mrs. Pelosi to go to her base and say, I brought them down from 750 to 730. Both sides will declare a victory, and we will all have lost. So it goes. That's the American political system. It's really extraordinary. That's much more important than the detail that he asked for 8-point-something billion for that wall that he earlier asked a good bit less for. He won't get that in any case. Strange. Put it together with the other group that he takes care of, employers. The tax cut in December of 2017 was for the employer what the rising defense budget is for the military. It was a gift. It was a gift of billions and billions of dollars that suddenly they didn't have to pay. Those corporations loved it. They know that Mr. Trump, whatever else he may be, and many of them don't like good parts of him and what he does, but they're not going to dislodge somebody who gave them the biggest tax cut in history, at least in recent history. And he gave it to them in 2017 after 30 or 40 years when profits of corporations went on a tear. It was a period of American history when they needed it least that they got the most. Of course they're going to support Mr. Trump. He's wonderful. He's as wonderful for employers as he is for the military. And just a little footnote, because I know some of you, don't get into the intricacies of this. Just follow the logic. He cuts the taxes on corporations and the rich in December of 2017, which means over the last year, 2018, the one just done, a vast amount of money that the government used to get in those taxes, it didn't get. So the revenue of the federal government plunged. But in order to get the tax cut through, he had to throw a few bones at the Democrats. So they didn't cut spending on social programs, actually raised it a little bit. Okay, you're with me? If a lot less money comes into the federal government, but they spend a bit more, they're going to run what economists call a deficit. They're going to be spending more, but they're taking in less. And the only way to do that, the way our government is set up, is for the federal government to borrow the money. To borrow so they can continue to spend, they have to borrow because the taxes aren't coming in, since they cut the taxes on corporations from 35% to 21% on profits. That was the cut. A 40% cut in 1 year on your profits tax. Well, where does the government go to borrow all the money that isn't coming in taxes from corporations and the rich? Now get ready, because if you understand this, you're going to be very upset. They turn around to those same corporations and those same rich people, and they borrow the money from them. And the reason is simple. You don't have any money to lend to the government. That's why it doesn't come to see you. You're too piss poor. They go to where the money is. And where the money is, they created by the tax cut. So for a rich corporation or a rich person, here's how the deal looks. Instead of paying taxes to buy my money, I get to loan them that money. They're going to pay me back, and while we wait, they're going to pay me interest. What kind of rich person would turn that down? None of you would turn it down, but you're not a rich person, which is why you never heard of this before. You're not in this game. You are the victim of this game. And part of your victim situation is you didn't know it. And what the United States government can't borrow from the corporations who now can lend it because they don't have to pay taxes, and the rich people who now have that money to lend because they don't pay taxes, what they can't get from them, if they need to borrow more, they borrow from the People's Republic of China, which is the largest single creditor of the United States government, which I will come to in a few minutes. You live in this. Do you realize with the debt the United States has to the People's Republic of China, that a good part of the taxes you all pay is collected by Washington from you? Right? April 15th is the day you have to pay your taxes for 2018. By April 15th, a month from now. A part of the taxes you pay, all the Washington government does is take it and send it as an interest payment to the People's Republic of China. Billions and billions of dollars that you pay in taxes that the Chinese use to help develop their military. Do you understand? You are funding the putative enemy. You poor, poor schmuck. And if you didn't understand it, that's part of your schmuckdom. That's part of what happens to you. If you either become economically illiterate or no one puts it together for you. Next item, Mr. Trump's proposed budget. Hold on a second. Mr. Trump's proposed budget has massive cuts in social programs, partly to offset the money going to the military and also to do something about the enormous deficits, because if you remember in ancient history, the Republicans were against deficits. They now run them enormous, but they're worried about that. Okay, so they're proposing, among other things, an enormous cut in Medicare support. Also a cut in Medicaid. Medicaid, the cut isn't so big, but they're going to give it to the states, which is a very bad thing, particularly in half the states of this country. But Medicare is going to be drastically cut. This is interesting for 2 or 3 reasons. One, when he ran for president in 2016, Mr. Trump guaranteed, he must have said it 50 times, that he would never touch Social Security, Medicare, those entitlement programs. So the game is over. He may be taking care of the military in the way I've showed you, and he may be taking care of the employers. But when it comes to the mass of people, promises, schmomises. When you all hear from the civics-minded folks amongst us how sad it is that half of the Americans don't go to vote, 2/3 of Americans don't pay attention to the politics that could care less, part of it is this endless experience of voting for somebody who simply goes some other way, like the opposite when elected. Yes, Americans keep hoping that the next generation, the new ones, will behave differently. But when that doesn't pan out, a lot of people turn off, and can you blame them? Well, you can, because it's going to hurt them by not voting, but you sure can understand why they would take that route, given their behavior. And look at Mr. Trump. He's cutting the environmental program. The UN is in a panic because he's cutting the amount of support the United States gives to the UN, which means that UNICEF and half a dozen other agencies, peacekeeping and others of the UN, will not be able to function if that budget goes through. So it's a massive cut of what the social programs are. At a time when the American people are very upset and angry, their jobs are not very good, their incomes are not very good, they haven't really recovered from the great crash. Yes, we have a lower level of unemployment, but the jobs that our people are getting are crappy jobs, low pay, no security, and few benefits. Not the kind of jobs they lost, but the kind they are now desperately having to take because they can't get anything else. And then he's going to hit them with a tremendous cut in medical coverage. We are already the country that gives the least amount of generalized health insurance to its population, while charging people a greater share of the national income for health care than any other industrial country. We pay more for less. Amazing. So a president who does that, who helps the military, who helps the employer class, those are minorities in our society. While screwing the majority has got a political problem, a big one. If you're going to screw the majority, let alone lying about it and now being caught, exposed, while you help the minority, you better have some way to distract the majority from what it is that's going on. You better make sure they don't think about it, they don't read about it, they don't see it. They don't talk to one another about it. Get them focused somewhere else. Make sure you send out 6 to 10 tweets a day about other things, like marauding Hondurans coming into Texas. Get very excited. Debate a wall, a big wall, a steel wall, a cement wall, a wall, no wall. Fight about a wall. Because this allows you to debate whether people who aren't white are okay to come into the country, whether Hispanics are too many by some standard. You can get into all these wonderful, it's like, let's debate about, abortion or anything else. Just get it away from the fundamental game being played here. Debate lots of topics. MMT, modern monetary theory, for those of you who don't follow it. Debate this detail, that detail. Get all excited about the nice dress that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez purchased and whether that's consistent with being a socialist. What? The kind of reach you have to make. But you're living in that. And that's a really important awareness you need to have, lest you get caught up. Even the stuff about Huawei, stealing our secrets. This is exciting. You can have an endless discussion about whether they're stealing. You have no way of knowing whether they're stealing or not. You know why? No one does. Because one of the things these companies make sure is that the minimum possible number of people are aware. It's too dangerous if many people know what's going on. So that's highly secret. Nobody knows whether any of this is true. This is all make-believe. This is PR, propaganda, whatever words you want. And to take it seriously means they've succeeded. You are actually lost in this junk, and therefore you're not focused on where it is that your interests lie.